The Park estate sat on the jagged spine of the Hudson Valley like a bloated, white tick, sucking the life out of the surrounding pines while the blizzard screamed. Amara adjusted her grip on the silver garland, her fingers coated in a thin, protective film of unrefined shea butter, the nutty, earthy scent of home, of the red dust of Enugu, clashing violently with the sterile, metallic tang of this house. This place didn't breathe, it calculated. It smelled of industrial lavender and the cold, ozone-heavy grease of high-end security systems. The mahogany banister felt like frozen bone beneath her palm, mocking the fragility of her own skin. She moved with the forced precision of a woman who knew her beauty was a burden, a target painted in a room full of men who traded in flesh and fear. And Conde Park was the sun everything here orbited, but today, it was his house manager, Richard Caldwell, who played the petty god. He was always watching. Higher. Richard barked from the marble floor below, his voice a dry rasp like sandpaper on cheap plywood. He stood with his arms crossed over a bespoke silk vest, his posture the stiff, artificial arrogance of a man who managed a king's house but forgot he was just a glorified servant. Amara bit the inside of her cheek, tasting the copper tang of blood, and stretched the silver-plated tin-copper alloy of the garland toward the crown molding. She had been trapped in this gilded cage for 3 months, 90 days of dodging Richard's snide remarks about her Nigerian accent and the way his cold eyes tracked her movements like a predator scenting a wound. The older staff, aunties who had survived the king pie for decades, whispered their warnings in the quiet of the pantry. Keep your head down, Omoj. Don't make mistakes. Because men like Richard don't need a reason to break you. But she tried. God, she tried to be invisible. The mansion was a theater of power tonight, draped in white lights that hummed with a low-frequency 60 Hz buzz that grated against her nerves like a dull saw. Poinsettias lined the corridors in crystal vases, their red leaves looking like fresh bloodstains against the white Carrara marble. The scent of pine and cinnamon was a suffocating shroud over the house's natural smell of gun oil and expensive scotch. Everything was prepared for the Christmas Eve summit that Conde Park would host for his associates. Men with dragon tattoos creeping up their necks and eyes like obsidian. They never smiled. Amara hated the way the light hit the polished floors. It was too bright. It felt like a trap. The vase, Richard snapped, his finger pointing at a piece of Goryeo-style celadon sitting on a console table of gilded ormolu. Move it to the center of that table. Now Amara climbed down the aluminum ladder, the haptic feedback of the cold metal vibrating through her palms. She approached the vase, recognizing the intricate crackle of the iron oxide glaze. It was heavy, a dense weight of kaolin clay that felt like the expectations of every Oga she'd ever fled. She lifted it with both hands, her heart thudding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her thumb brushed the cool, glazed surface, feeling the microscopic ridges of the hand-painted crane. The porcelain was cold. Her foot caught the loose tail of the silver garland she'd been weaving earlier. Time slowed. The rubber sole of her uniform shoe lost its coefficient of friction against the wax-heavy polish of the marble. The vase slipped, the glazed surface sliding through her grip as if it were coated in palm oil. The sound of it shattering wasn't a crash. It was a high-frequency explosion of ceramic shrapnel that peppered the floor like birdshot. Silence crashed down afterward. Heavy, suffocating silence. Amara stared at the blue and white fragments. Her life, much like the 12th century technique, was now a collection of jagged edges. "You clumsy, incompetent fool," Richard's voice was a venomous whisper. He stepped closer, his polished Oxfords crunching a priceless fragment of Korean history into the limestone floor. "I'm sorry," Amara said immediately, dropping to her knees, her hands reaching for the shards. A sharp edge sliced into her thumb, the blood blooming like a red hibiscus against the white ceramic. "I'm so sorry, I'll clean it up right now, She stopped as he loomed over her, his shadow a cold weight. "Do you have any idea what that vase was worth?" Richard sneered, his face contorted. 17th century. Brought from Seoul by Mr. Park's grandfather. Irreplaceable. Amara's hands shook as she gathered the pieces, her skin crawling under his gaze. "I didn't mean to, it was an accident, please." Richard's laugh was a harsh, dry sound. "An accident?" You've been nothing but a liability since the day you arrived. I told Mr. Park hiring someone of your pedigree was a mistake. 19 years old, no references worth mentioning, no family to vouch for character. The words stung more than the cut on her thumb. He saw her as nothing. I'll pay for it. However long it takes, Sal. Pay for it. Richard crouched down, his breath smelling of stale coffee and malice. With what? Your pathetic salary? It would take you 5 years to cover the value of what you just destroyed. Amara fought the tears, refusing to give him the satisfaction of her salt. Please, just let me fix this. I'll work extra hours. I'll do anything. But Richard stood abruptly, his face set in a mask of bureaucratic cruelty. You'll leave. He smoothed the front of his vest with sharp, precise movements. Right now. Get out of this house. Amara's head snapped up, her heart a drum in her ears. What? She whispered. You heard me. Richard walked toward the coat closet near the front door, his gait heavy with unearned power. You're fired. I want you off this property immediately. Panic clawed at her throat, a cold, acidic burn. Outside, the wind howled at 60 miles per hour, rattling the double-paned glass. The sky had broken open like a ripe melon, spilling ice that turned the world into a white void. But Amara scrambled to her feet. It's Christmas Eve. There's a blizzard outside. I don't have. Not my concern. Richard pulled open the heavy oak door. The Arctic air blasted into the hall like a physical blow, carrying a swirl of crystalline snow that turned the marble into a skating rink. Unless you'd prefer I call the police and report you for destruction of property? Amara's blood ran cold. She was one bad report away from the immigration wolves. She had no family left since the accident 3 years ago. No savings. Nothing. Her voice cracked, her street-smart shell failing her. My coat. At least let me get my coat from the staff room. But Richard wasn't listening. He grabbed her thin uniform jacket, a cheap 05 CLO-rated polyester blend, from the hook and thrust it at her. Take this and go. Now her fingers closed around the fabric. It was a death sentence. She looked past him into the white wall of the storm. Visibility was less than 3 feet. Please, she tried one last time. I'm sorry about the vase. I'll do anything to make it right, but don't make me go out there. Richard's hand closed around her upper arm, his grip hard enough to leave a permanent bruise on her mahogany skin. I'm done listening to excuses from staff who can't follow simple instructions. He pulled her toward the threshold, using his weight to force her out. The cold hit her like a hammer. The wind tore the air from her lungs. Don't come back, Richard said. Then he slammed the door. The lock clicked with the heavy, mechanical finality of a prison bolt. Amara stood on the stone steps, her mind refusing to process the sheer scale of the malice. The wind screamed in her ears, a high-pitched whistle that sounded like the wailing of forest spirits. She had to move. If she stayed, she'd be a frozen monument by midnight. She pulled the thin jacket over her uniform. The main gate was a half-mile trek through knee-deep drifts. Amara stepped off the stairs, her indoor flats slipping on the black ice beneath the powder. She fell hard, her knees hitting the frozen gravel with a sickening thud. Get up. Get up. She forced herself upright, her breath coming in ragged, white plumes. Each step was a battle against the atmosphere. The snow stung her eyes, the salt and ice burning like pepper. How far was the gate? The driveway was a white ribbon lost in the void. Her teeth started chattering, a rhythmic clicking she couldn't stop. Her fingers went numb first, the biological reality of vasoconstriction as her body abandoned her extremities to save her heart. She wrapped her arms around herself, the polyester jacket feeling like wet tissue paper. She kept walking because stopping meant the end. The cold was a living thing, a beast. Her legs began to feel like heavy pillars of lead. The alarm bells in her mind were ringing, but they were distant, muffled by the roaring of the wind. Hypothermia was a silent thief. It stole your logic first, then your warmth. She tripped over a buried branch and went down, the snow filling her mouth, tasting of nothing and iron. She crawled toward a dark shape, a pine tree, its needles frozen into glass. She managed to prop herself against the trunk. Maybe just rest for a minute. Just one. She sank into the snow, and strangely, it felt soft, like the warm sand of a beach back home. Her eyes drifted shut. Inside the mansion, Kongdae Park pushed through the front door at exactly 7:15. He was a man of shadow and silence, his black cashmere coat dusted with the white ash of the storm. He shrugged out of the coat, his second in command, a man named Minho, taking it with a silent bow. The entrance hall was immaculate, but the air was dead. It lacked the specific, earthy scent of the Ethiopian coffee Amara usually had waiting. It lacked her. "Mr. Caldwell," Kongdae called out, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that made the crystals on the chandelier vibrate. Richard appeared from the kitchen, his expression a mask of practiced neutrality. "Mr. Park, welcome back." The roads must have been treacherous. Kongdae ignored the pleasantry, his eyes scanning the hall like a general surveying a battlefield. "Where's Amara?" Richard's eye flickered, a micro-tremor of guilt. "Miss Turner requested to leave early this evening. Personal matters." Kongdae studied the man, his gaze heavy and obsidian. "She didn't mention anything this morning. She knows the protocol for the Christmas summit." Richard clasped his hands, his voice smooth as oil. "It was rather sudden. She seemed quite insistent about leaving before the storm worsened." Kongdae pulled out his phone, checking the encrypted security logs. The last staff shuttle had left at 5. "How did she get home?" "The transport is grounded." "I'm not certain. She left through the front entrance." Richard's voice was too calm. Kongdae's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping in a way that signaled a coming storm. The front entrance was for guests and the boss. "When exactly did she leave?" he asked, his voice dropping into a register that made Minho reach for his weapon. "Perhaps 45 minutes ago?" Richard replied. 45 minutes. In a bomb cyclone. Kongdae didn't feel the warmth of the hearth. He felt the fire.
Minho, cam de barquet.
Security footage. Now they moved to the monitoring room, the air smelling of ozone and server fans. Minho pulled up the feed, scrubbing through the data on the 4K monitors. There it was. Amara on her knees. The broken celadon. Richard looming over her like a vulture. Even without the audio, the cruelty was a visceral thing on the screen. Kongdae watched as Richard grabbed her arm. He watched as the man pushed the 25-year-old woman out into a sub-zero death trap without a coat. The room went deadly quiet. Kongdae's rage didn't manifest as a scream. It was an implosion, a localized black hole that sucked the air from the room. 45 minutes, he whispered, a sound like grinding stones. He was already moving. He didn't grab dress shoes. He pulled on tactical boots and a heavy fur-lined parka. "Call the medics," he ordered. "If her heart stops, yours is next." He yanked the front door open, the blizzard howling as if in challenge. He ran down the driveway, a high-powered tactical light in his hand cutting a yellow scar through the white chaos. His heart thudded against his ribs, not with fear, but with a cold, focused intent. He was a man who had survived the streets of Busan and the boardrooms of Seoul. He knew how easily a life could be extinguished. He wouldn't let it happen to her. She was the only thing in this house that wasn't a transaction. "There," Minho shouted, pointing toward a dark mound against a pine tree. Kongdae lunged through the waist-high drifts, his boots sinking into the frozen earth. He reached her and dropped to his knees, his hands shaking as he touched her neck. Her skin was the temperature of the ice. But there, a pulse.
Faint.
Threadbare. "Amara," he shouted, his voice cracking the winter air. Her lips were blue, her eyelashes frosted with ice. She didn't move. He lifted her against his chest. She was ice. He didn't wait. He slipped his arms under her, lifting her against his chest. She was so light, a fragile bird broken by a man who thought he was big. He could feel the cold radiating off her, a physical presence that tried to numb his own heart. He turned and ran back toward the mansion, his breath coming in jagged, white plumes. Richard was a dead man walking. But first, he had to keep her soul from drifting away into the white. He held her closer, his rage the only fire left in the world.
He ran.
He didn't stop. Kongdae kicked the heavy oak doors open with a force that sent a shudder through the limestone foundation of the park estate. He didn't stop to shake the ice from his parka or the frost from his lashes as he stormed into the foyer, his boots leaving dark, slushy gashes across the pristine Carrara marble. The medical team he'd summoned was already there, a blur of white coats and stainless steel gurneys, their movements frantic under the weight of his silent, lethal expectation. He felt the girl's heartbeat, a shallow, stuttering thing against his own chest, like a moth beating its wings against a glass jar. Her skin had reached a temperature that defied the living, a marble-cold density that made his own blood boil with a heat that felt like a localized sun. He laid her onto the gurney, his fingers lingering for a microsecond on the rough texture of her polyester uniform, before the medics swarmed her with Bear Hugger warming blankets and Ringer's lactate warmed to exactly 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Richard stood by the mahogany staircase, his face a sickly shade of tallow, clutching a silk handkerchief as if it could shield him from the atmospheric pressure shifting in the room. He looked small. He looked dead. "I'm sorry, sir, but she was entirely incompetent and the celadone," Richard began, his voice a pathetic treble that scraped against the silence of the hall. Kongdae didn't let him finish the sentence, moving with a velocity that bypassed the human eye's ability to track, his hand closing around Richard's throat with the hydraulic pressure of a vice. The house manager's windpipe gave a dry, structural groan, his feet dangling inches above the expensive marble as the oxygen supply to his brain was cut with surgical precision. Kongdae didn't scream. He spoke in a whisper that carried the weight of a falling mountain, his obsidian eyes reflecting the cowardice of the man he held. "You threw a human being into a graveyard because of a piece of clay?" he asked, the rage finally detonating in his chest, not as fire, but as an absolute, freezing vacuum that sucked the life from the foyer.
He threw the man.
Richard hit the limestone wall with a sound like a wet bag of sand, his bespoke vest tearing on a sconce. "Get out," Kongdae commanded, the two words vibrating in the marrow of everyone present. "If I see your face on this property when the sun rises, the police will find you in pieces small enough to fit in that broken vase." Richard scrambled to his feet, his dignity a shredded thing on the floor, and fled toward the back exits, without a single backward glance. Kongdae turned his focus back to the medical suite, the adrenaline in his system beginning to recede, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. He watched through the reinforced glass of the guest wing as they monitored her core temperature, the digital display glowing a neon green in the dim light. She was a fighter. He knew it. Amara woke up in a room that smelled of expensive vanilla and the sterile, sharp tang of medical-grade oxygen. The sheets beneath her were a 1,000-thread count Egyptian cotton, so smooth they felt like a second skin, a far cry from the scratchy, starch-heavy linens of the staff quarters. Her body felt heavy, a dull ache radiating from her bones as if she had been disassembled and put back together by a clumsy mechanic. The hum of the heart monitor was a steady, rhythmic intrusion into the silence, its 60 beat per minute pace a testament to her survival. She tried to sit up, but her muscles screamed in a dialect of pain she hadn't yet learned to translate. Her skin was warm. She was alive. "Don't move," a voice rumbled from the shadows of the corner, a sound like deep water moving over smooth stones. Kongdae sat in a velvet armchair, his black suit replaced by a simple charcoal sweater, the sharp lines of his face softened by the amber glow of the bedside lamp. He watched her with an intensity that made her breath hitch, a watcher and the watched, the power dynamic shifting in the quiet of the room. Amara looked at her hands, seeing the neat bandages where the porcelain had sliced her skin, the antiseptic yellow stain of betadine still visible around the edges. She remembered the cold, the way the snow had tasted like iron, and the final, crushing weight of the wind. She felt small. She felt seen. "The vase," she croaked, her throat feeling like it had been scrubbed with raw sandpaper. Kongdae stood and moved to the side of the bed, his presence filling the space with a gravitational pull that she couldn't ignore. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers for a moment before he gently brushed a stray braid away from her forehead. "The vase was a lie," he said, his voice dropping into a register that felt like a secret meant only for her. "Richard didn't fire you for the clay. He fired you because he was afraid of how I looked at you." Amara's heart thudded against her ribs, a different kind of panic now, one that had nothing to do with the blizzard. "He was close. He stayed." "I have no family here, Oga," she said, the regional term slipping out before she could catch it, her Nigerian pride a thin shield against the luxury surrounding her. "If you keep me here, People will talk, and the wall will be more than a broken vase. Kong Dae's eyes didn't waver, his gaze tracing the architecture of her face, as if he were memorizing a map of a territory he intended to claim. He knew the risks of the Kangpai world, the way vulnerability was treated as a blood scent in the water by his rivals in the city. He didn't care. He was the boss. Let them talk, he replied, his thumb grazing the line of her jaw, a touch that felt like a brand. I've spent my life building a fortress so that I could decide who enters and who stays. You're staying, he told her then about Richard, about the way the man had been found trying to sell security codes to a rival syndicate in the hours after he was banished. The house manager wasn't just a petty tyrant. He was a traitor who had used Amara's accident as a cover to remove a witness to his own rising greed. The threat was escalating. The peace was over. The next 3 days were a blur of high-stakes security updates and the soft, quiet moments of a competence-driven romance. Kong Dae stayed in the wing, his laptop humming on the mahogany desk as he managed his empire, while she recovered, a stoic sentinel who only relaxed when her breathing leveled out in sleep. Amara watched him through half-closed lids, noting the way he handled a SIG Sour P226 with the same casual grace he used to drink tea. She saw the dragon tattoo on his forearm, a masterpiece of ink and scar tissue that told a story of a street-smart boy who became a king. He was dangerous. He was hers. We have to move, Kong Dae said on the 4th morning, his expression reverting to the obsidian mask he wore for the world. Richard didn't go quietly. He went to the Kim Syndicate, and they are moving on the perimeter. The strategic exile phase had begun, a calculated withdrawal to a secondary location in the Adirondacks where the terrain favored the defender. Amara didn't argue, her cynicism replaced by a pragmatic understanding of the life she was now tethered to. She packed her few belongings, the shea butter, a small photo of her parents, a carved wooden bead from Enugu, and followed him into the armored SUV. The engine roared. The gates opened. The drive was a tactical exercise in reconnaissance, the SUV's reinforced run-flat tires crunching over the salt and ice of the mountain pass. Kong Dae sat beside her, his hand resting on the haptic feedback screen of the security console, monitoring the drone feed of the road ahead. He was a man of protocols and perimeters, but every few minutes, his eyes would flick to her, a micro-gesture of protection that spoke louder than any declaration. Amara looked out at the red dust of the sunset hitting the snow, thinking of the red dust of home, and realized that safety wasn't a place. Safety was a man. Safety was him. They reached the safe house, a brutalist masterpiece of concrete and glass perched on a cliffside, just as the first light of a rival's headlights appeared in the valley below. Kong Dae stepped out of the vehicle, the cold air hitting him, but he didn't flinch, his focus entirely on the perimeter guards moving into position with thermal optics. He turned to Amara, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the reinforced entrance, his grip firm and grounding. Inside, he commanded, the boss returning to the forefront, but his eyes held a transparency he only showed to her. The game is ending tonight, she nodded. She waited. The confrontation was short, a kinetic explosion of suppressed gunfire and tactical precision that Amara watched through the multispectral camera feeds in the safe house's core. She saw Kong Dae move like a shadow, his silhouette a dark stroke against the white snow, a predator reclaiming his territory with a lethal, rhythmic competence. Richard was there, a pathetic figure caught in the crossfire of bigger men, his greed finally meeting the hard reality of a Kangpai debt. When it was over, the silence that returned to the mountain was different. It was the silence of a resolved chord. The threat was gone. The debt was paid. Kong Dae returned to the core, his parka torn, a thin line of blood on his cheek that looked like a warrior's paint. He didn't say a word, simply crossed the room and pulled Amara into his arms, his heart thudding against hers in a synchronized rhythm of survival. She held him, her fingers tracing the dragon on his arm, understanding that she was no longer the maid, and he was no longer just the boss. They were two survivors of different storms, anchored together in a world that tried to freeze them out. The transition was complete. The union was iron. The vase is gone, Amara whispered against his chest, her voice steady now, the cynicism transformed into a street-smart philosophy of hope. But the house is still standing. Olga, Kong Dae pulled back, his eyes searching hers, a rare, genuine smile breaking the obsidian mask for the first time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, blue and white shard of the celadon he had recovered from the foyer floor. "We will build something new from the pieces," he said.
He stayed.
They stayed.